Welcome everyone. I think we are live, and welcome to this afternoon's session of the SDG Forum. I hope that you've had a good few sessions before this. We're reaching a climax, I think, this afternoon. And let me just, before I introduce our two guests who are going to present the SDG Barometer, Lars Moratis and Valérie Swaen, let me quickly just let you know what is ahead for you. Firstly, my name is Professor Wayne Visser, and I hold the chair in Sustainable Transformation at Antwerp Management School. And that's supported by BASF, Randstad, and the Port of Antwerp. And what you can expect after we present the results of the SDG Barometer is that we will go into a stakeholder panel. It will be in a separate room with a separate link. And there we're going to have Els Herzogen, Director of 11-11-11, Reina Spiessens, Junior UN Youth Delegate on Sustainable Development, Marissa Leroux, Coordinator of International Cooperation of the International Department at the Liberal Trade Union, and Olivier de Wassinge, Managing Director of the Union Wallon des Enterprises. And after that, we will have an intervention shortly from Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And finally, a reaction from Ministers Hilde Krevits from Flanders, Celine Tellier from Wallonia, and Bernard Mazane at the federal level, before we have a closing few remarks from Luc van Liedekerke from the University of Antwerp. So, exciting afternoon ahead, and let me waste no time now in introducing our two presenters to get us started. So, Lars Moratis, who is Chair in Management Education for Sustainability, it's a joint chair between Antwerp Management School and Breda University of Applied Sciences. He's a professor in sustainability and holds a PhD in management science. He's worked in the field of sustainable business, both as an academic and in corporate practice. And his main interests are around responsible management education, the SDGs, sustainable business models, and the credibility of sustainability claims. He's written several books and many chapters and articles on the subject. And then joining him is Valérie Swaen from the University Louvain School of Management. She's Professor of Marketing and Corporate Social Responsibility there, as well as at IESEG School of Management in France. And her main research interest is around stakeholders' reactions to CSR communication. She's leading the Louvain CSR network, and also holds different corporate chairs in CSR, particularly the multi-company Philippe de Woot chair in corporate sustainable management. So welcome to you both. We're excited to hear the results of the SDG Barometer for this year. Over to you. We will begin sharing the slides now.
Great, thanks very much for this introduction, Wayne, and a warm welcome on behalf of me and Valérie as well. It's good to see that you're attending this SDG Forum in such large numbers, and we're happy to share the results of our joint research project, the second edition of the SDG Barometer. Just as a first, I would like to thank everyone involved, everyone that has been involved and has contributed to this research project and to the report. And I should also mention upfront that the report will be available through a link afterwards, after this presentation. So for the agenda, Jan, if you could go to the next slide. Great. So for the agenda, I will briefly introduce the why of the SDG Barometer. Also have inform you a bit about the methodology, the research approach that we followed. Afterwards, together with Valérie, I will present some of the key findings of the SDG Barometer 2020, and then we'll end with some conclusions and recommendations. Again, I should note here that we have selected some of the most eye-catching results. So for all findings, we refer to the report that will be available afterwards. So why the SDG Barometer? You can go to the next slide, Jan. Thanks. So a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a follow-up study to the Corporate Responsibility Barometer that was held in 2011-2015, and the first SDG Barometer that was held in 2018. And together, these research projects provided insight in organizational perceptions on sustainability and organizational behavior in sustainability. And together, I think they provide a nice long-term trend analysis now in the course of almost 10 years. Second reason for the SDG Barometer is that there are clearly some major SDG challenges for Belgium, particularly relating to SDG 12, 13, and 14, which are respectively responsible consumption and production, climate action, and life below water. The main objective of the SDG Barometer then would be to monitor the SDG awareness, adoption, implementation, and communication of organizations. And in doing that, it's part of, you could say, a global initiative where data is being collected on these topics, so that we also could compare the Belgian results together, the Belgian results with other results from countries worldwide. And as a fourth reason, the SDG Barometer, I think, provides some interesting insights for both policy and practice, and it identifies some actionable signposts for the new government that I'm sure is eager to pursue this agenda. So just a couple of words on methodology. You could go on, Jan. Next slide, please. Yes, great. So what we did, we followed a dual research approach consisting of a quantitative part and a qualitative part. The qualitative part consisted particularly of interviews, but also some document analysis, including sustainability reports of the Bel 20 companies. The quantitative part was a large survey questionnaire, if you will, which resulted in the end in 961 responses, which probably is a good response number. I should note that some of the responses were partly incomplete, but we have been able to use data to get the best out of it and to get some solid results. Also, I should note that it's not a statistically representative research, but I do think there's a nice spread across several categories. As you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, 60% companies, 16% governmental organization, 11% educational institutions, and 6% non-governmental organizations, and also a nice spread across regions. Also, it's interesting to know that most of the companies, the majority of companies, had at a maximum 100 employees, so they would qualify as small and medium-sized companies, and some 40% of these of the companies identified as family businesses. So I'll give the word now to Valérie to start with some of the key findings of the SDG Barometer 2020.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide, Jan. Okay, so we could not have collected data about SDG without discussing the impact of the current COVID crisis on the realization of the SDG agenda. As you can see on this slide, 32% of our respondents, for them, the COVID pandemic makes the SDG more relevant than ever. At the same time, over 27% expect that there will be a delay in achieving the SDGs. So there is a clear tension between these two first answers. In addition, 22% believe that COVID crisis illustrates the need to shift the focus to other sustainability priorities, recognizing the systemic nature of the current crisis. On the next slide, we study the SDG awareness. When it comes to sustainability awareness, nearly all responding organizations appear to have some or a lot of attention for sustainability. No less than 91% of the organization are aware of the SDGs. This is a rise compared to the 2018 barometer, where it was only 87 of the organization. The few organizations that have no attention at all for sustainability indicated that this was for not being incentivized to do so or not having sufficient knowledge or budgets. On the next slide, we discovered that in practice, organizations tend to have different approaches toward the integration of SDG in their strategy. The results show that 1 over 4 organizations have taken several concrete steps to integrate the SDGs in their strategies, and 22% have partly or fully translated the SDGs to their organizational context, for instance, their sector, their market, their locality. Only 11% appear to have not integrated the SDG and is not planning to do so. So looking at the forces that may further drive organizations to adopt the SDG, organizations mentioned that complying with societal expectation, reducing social and environmental risks, and showing respect for the communities in which the organization operates are the 3 most important factors. These top 3 driving forces are interestingly not directly related to the market, and 2 of the 3 driving forces are not economic. These results strongly differ from 2018 Barometer, where we showed that market-related factors were seen as the most convincing driving forces for engaging with the SDGs. When asked what would be the preferred strategy for involving organizations in realizing the SDG agenda, 39 indicates that this can be done best through making transparent the hidden cost of unsustainability, known as true pricing. Only 17% of the respondents agree that the preferred strategy was strengthening legal requirements. Next slide.
Yes, I'll take it again from here then. So when you look at which SDGs actually are prioritized by organizations, overall we see similar results when compared to 2018. So that says 70% of the responding organizations, they give priority to the multiple SDGs, kind of a selective focus, and 13% I should say, focuses on all SDGs, so kind of a holistic approach. What's more interesting now is then to look at per sector, what are the prioritized SDGs. So as you can see here, for the corporate sector, the top 5 SDGs, so the most prioritized SDGs are SDG 3, 8, 9, 12, and 13, which I think should not come as a surprise because they relate immediately to the corporate context and the corporate interests. Next slide, please. When we look at the prioritized SDGs in governments, with governments, there's not very large differences between governments and companies, besides for one SDG, right? So the one SDG that's different here is that governments also prioritize affordable and clean energy. And it's may strike as a small difference, but actually you could think of this as a big difference, because affordable and clean energy is, of course, one of the you could say fuels of the transition towards a sustainable economy. Next slide, please. Interestingly, for NGOs and also for educational institutions, by the way, the picture could not have been any more different, actually. So the SDGs that are prioritized by non-governmental organizations are SDG 1, 3, 4, 5, and 10, as you can see here, which is a kind of a similar picture to the SDGs that are prioritized by educational institutions. Next slide, please. Which is pretty much the same, right? So only a small difference here, as you can see, is SDG 12. That's different. Taking it all together, what is interesting is there's a kind of a large difference between the SDGs that are prioritized by companies and governments on the one hand versus NGOs and education on the other hand. So clearly you could say that different SDG agendas are being followed across these across these sectors, if you will. And it is interesting, I think, because such differences may actually lead to misalignments in policy and practice. For example, when it comes to government policy, government prioritizing certain sustainability priorities or issues over others, including in this case clean energy when compared to the corporate sector, but also, for example, when it comes to cross-sector partnerships, right, where companies are prioritizing different sustainability issues when compared to their partners, such as NGOs and education. And as a third example of a misalignment, I think you could say that it's interesting from the perspective of future employees, right? So that educational institutions have integrated several SDGs into the curricula, and perhaps these are not the same SDGs that companies seem to prioritize. However, I think it becomes even more problematic in a sense when you look at the least prioritized SDGs. Next slide, please. So what you see here is that for companies and governments, the least prioritized SDGs are actually SDG 1 and SDG 2, which factually are considered as the kind of conditional SDGs for other SDGs in Agenda 2030. For NGOs and education, there's the least prioritized SDG actually is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which suggests, again, a misalignment when you compare it to the priorities by companies and governments. And when you look at the overall data, we can clearly see that SDGs 14 and 15, life below water and life on land, are least prioritized SDGs. It is interesting because these two SDGs, they constitute you could say, the biodiversity agenda, which directly relates to the climate crisis, but again, also to the COVID-19 crisis.
So the results of this barometer indicate that the integration of the SDG in sustainability strategies is not yet mature. One of the reasons for this is that it seems difficult for organizations to relate the SDG to the existing sustainability priorities, which are generally determined based on materiality analysis. So for this year barometer, we ask whether or not organizations perform materiality analysis. The results on the left side of the slide show that 36% of the organization perform a materiality analysis, with 50% of the companies, 41% of governmental organizations, 30% of NGOs, and 16% of educational institutions doing so. On the right side, you can see that no more than 12% of the organizations performing a materiality analysis fully align it with the SDGs, while 14% indicate they do not take into account for the SDG at all in their materiality analysis. The results show that 41% take into account the SDG to a certain degree when performing their materiality analysis. It seems that organizations experience difficulties in practice for relating the SDG to the sustainability topics that are relevant to them. In particular, companies may be used to perform a materiality analysis in which the short-term importance of a specific issue is an important factor. It is clear that the SDGs do not originate from such a perspective. They are neither focused on the company, nor do they take a short-term view. In the qualitative interviews, we investigate further this issue, and we notice that different people have different interpretation of the materiality concept, some of them even considering that the notion of materiality remains unclear and confused. So on the next slide, please. To track progress, it's important that organizations monitor their SDG actions and impacts. A total of 29% indicate that they are using at least several of the SDG indicators to monitor their SDG initiatives. Of this group, just little 7% appear to perform an extensive impact measurement based on the SDG. Some 15% use indicators to track their progress, but not those proposed within the SDG framework. And we notice that half of the respondent organizations do not use indicators at all to monitor progress on the SDGs. So Lars, some conclusion?
Yeah, so as for conclusions, and you can go directly to the next slide. In the end, when you look at the data from this SDG Barometer 2020, there are several, you could say, it's kind of a double-edged sword, a sword, if you will. So as overall conclusions, you can read and report a more extensive account of this, but we think in the end, some of the main conclusions are the one that you see here. So first, we clearly see that the SDGs are moving center stage within organizations when it comes to awareness, when it comes to application, etc., etc. They're also related to the sustainability strategy of organizations. And at the same time, you see that COVID-19 is expected to delay the realization of the SDGs. So they are going center stage, but at the same time, there's an expected delay. As a second conclusion is that what we see is that the SDGs enable organizations to look beyond their immediate self-interest and perhaps have a more societal view, if you will. On the other hand, you see that organizations, they take a selective view over a holistic view of the SDGs, like I showed with the prioritized SDGs, right? So companies and organizations and companies in particular, they are focusing on a selection of the SDGs rather than adopting the entire SDG agenda. And as a third conclusion, we see that organizations, they do experience and they do perceive value in the SDGs beyond market-related factors, which, as Valérie already mentioned, is a clearly different result from 2 years ago. But on the other hand, we see that SDG impact assessments are the exceptions at the moment rather than a rule. So do we know what the exact impacts are of this societal orientation of companies and other organizations? Probably not. So in the report, actually, we have expressed our hope that the COVID-19 pandemic functions as a kind of a wake-up call in this regard. So in the end, we could say that's a symptom of a systemic crisis, this COVID-19 situation, and that's both the consequence of and at the same time the trigger again of a perfect storm, if you will, of sustainability issues. And it's, I mean, we still have less than 10 years to achieve Agenda 2030. And so I think it's all hands on deck, and we really need to find leverage points. We really need to find ways to further accelerate and live up to the fast and thorny challenges that societies worldwide are confronted with at the moment and probably for the years to come. And so these really are the times to make decisions towards realizing a truly sustainable future. And I think the SDG Barometer results show that the ingredients are there. So making right decisions is the main challenge for the new Belgian government, as far as we're concerned. And to assist them, we have formulated several recommendations that Valérie will now address as a final part of this presentation.
Yes, thank you. So based on what you said, we listed on the next slide 5 recommendations. The first one is about the incentives and communication effort that could be done really to persuade organizations to engage further with the SDG and to recognize also those organizations that engage already with the SDG, for them to be able to benefit from their engagement. So, for instance, media platform can serve the purpose of recognizing this organization. It's maybe also another option could be to adopt a ranking initiative that can be based on the level of SDG engagement or actual impact. Such initiatives should be helpful to accelerate SDG adoption. The second point is really linked to what Lars just said. It's important to monitor the true effect of the COVID crisis on the SDG to be able to take the proper policy measurement. And for this, we need further research to really see how the pandemic crisis will impact the sustainability commitment of organizations. The third aspect is related to materiality that we discuss further in this 2020 barometer. It's important to investigate further why organizations resist embracing all SDG and what could be done to encourage them to do so. For instance, is it by developing strategies for engaging organizations on those SDG that they do not perceive as very relevant and that they find also difficult to implement? It's also possible maybe to think about new methodologies for performing materiality analysis. The fourth point, it's about the SDG impacts and impact measurement that we show you that it's very limited in the current activities of companies and organizations. So what are the actions the organizations are taking on the SDG and which one are they not taking? And it's essential to emphasize the importance of impact measurement. And it's also the idea to develop maybe a SDG-based true pricing methodology through which organization can identify the hidden sustainability costs of their operations. And finally, the role of education. Of course, the ability to engender sustainable change is linked to the integration of SDG in the educational system. This being said, there are already efforts happening in different education organizations, but it should be accelerated. And it's really important to invest in the awareness of students and to educate them, but also in the awareness and the education of teachers and directors of schools. Experiments should be stimulated, and educational institutions on every level should be supported in engaging with the SDG. We finish exactly on time. I thank you all for your attention. I thank Lars for this collaboration, and of course Jan for everything, and Wayne for this introduction. The floor is yours, Wayne.
Thank you so much. You really did get it spot on in terms of timing. We appreciate that. And some really interesting results there, which we're going to explore in more detail in the next session, which is the panel discussion. And we will post a link now in the chat where you can go to the next session, which will start in about 5 minutes. We will also post a link to where you can find the report in the chat here. And if you don't get it before you leave, then in the chat for the panel discussion. So it just leaves me to thank you both, Lars and Valérie. Thank you so much for sharing these interesting findings. We look forward to digging into them in a little more detail in the following session. You see now that Anneline has posted the link to the next session, which will start in 5 minutes. We'll see you there. Thank you very much. And thanks, Lars and Valérie.
Thanks.
Thanks.